Hello and welcome to Friday Live. I am your host, Strata lawyer Amanda Farmer. We are heading out live this fine Friday to our Facebook page, to LinkedIn, to YouTube. This is your wrap up of the week in Strata. How is everybody feeling today? If you're coming on in live, as always, give me a hello. Let me know that you are there tuning in today. If you're catching the replay, give me a hello as well. We have lots to talk about today. I will be here up to around about 5 o'clock, probably close to a full hour for us today for our Friday Live. What's going on? As usual, there is never a Friday that I sit down and think, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to talk about on Friday Live today? I have a practice where I am always on the lookout for things to bring to you here in a Friday chat, any news, any interesting cases, any changes to legislation, questions that I see coming up regularly here on the page inside our members forum with my clients. And I make a list in our Google Sheet that we have here that my team helps me out with. And by the time we get to Friday, there is plenty there to talk about, more in fact than we can fit into an hour. That is just the nature of Strata, isn't it? There's always lots going on. If you're coming on in, I would love for you to say hi to me here in the comments. I can see the comments that come through Facebook, through LinkedIn, and through YouTube. Kareem is here saying, hi, Amanda. How you doing, Kareem? Thank you for joining me here live. Anna is here. Hey, Anna. How you going? Petra is tuning in. Hi, Petra. I know you are looking forward to one topic in particular here today. I saw your post earlier on the page. Thank you. Rochelle is here. Rochelle, who is our team member, our YSP, one of our YSP team members, hardworking Rochelle, who many of you will know, has been with me for many, many years. She is tuning in today from the other side. She's on the public side today. She has very generously gone to care for a family member who is unwell. So our heart is with you, Rochelle. We are thinking of you and your family. I know it's a hard time for you, but lovely to see you here. Mina is helping us out in the background behind the scenes today. So Mina is our new team member, been with us for a couple of weeks. We're throwing her in the deep end. But so far, she is doing a fantastic job. Thank you, Mina. Okay. Gail is here saying hi. Hi, Gail. How you going? Jane is here. Good to see you, Jane. Hey, Cassie McLean. Nice to see you here. Hey to you, Cassie. Being able to find the time in your busy day as a Strata manager to join us here today. Great to see you. Right. Well, thank you for all those hellos. Keep them coming. Lots to talk about. As I said, a colleague of mine said to me earlier this week, a lawyer colleague said to me, Amanda, I know you do your Friday thing. I think she'd called me last Friday and said, I hope I'm not interrupting. I know you do Friday thing. I said, no, we're all good. And she said, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you keep up and continue to deliver your regular live sessions. And look, from my point of view, A, there's always a lot to talk about that I want to share with you. And B, it keeps me on my toes, keeps me on my toes, keeps my ears open, my eyes open for those cases, which in turn help me with my client work and supporting the members inside our community, keep me sharp as a lawyer. If I'm paying attention to what's happening in the media, where we're proposing reform, what it is that is of interest to owners, all of that is good stuff for a Strata lawyer to be well across. So I enjoy it. There's lots of news to bring to you and keeps me sharp. And that's why I do it. That's why I continue to be here for you as much as I can, live here on our Facebook page and heading out to our various platforms. Bill and Ben saying, let's get cooking. Always impatient, Bill and Ben. I like to give you an intro to make sure everybody's here. Everybody's warmed up. Everybody's ready. Nobody misses a thing. There is strategy. There is strategy at play here, Bill and Ben. We will get cooking. And we'll see if there's a bylaw for that. if there's a bylaw for that, indeed. Francis, at last we've connected. Hey, Francis, welcome. Come on in. We are getting into the swing of things here. Matthew saying, keeping sharp. Well done. Matthew joining us from LinkedIn. Thank you very much, Matthew. It's good to see you here. Shana is here from Coffs Harbour. Welcome, Shana. Awesome. Now, lots to talk about. We are going to have a quick swing around to this week's podcast episode, as I do like to do here on live. Make sure that you have all managed to have a listen or are able to access that if you haven't yet had a listen. We do have an update on what is happening, what's been promised, let's say, or proposed over at Mascot Towers. We were only talking about that last Friday. Someone may have been listening, because lo and behold, there was an announcement from our current New South Wales government on Saturday morning. I'll let you know what that was. We are going to talk about, as Bill and Ben has requested, let's get cooking. We're going to talk about a cooking bylaw, or more accurately, a no cooking bylaw. And I'll let you know whether the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal upheld that bylaw as valid, or whether it decided that bylaw was outside the bounds of our New South Wales legislation. Interesting case there that I'll share with you. And yes, we're going to talk about how to fill vacancies on the Strata committee. Conversation last week here on live about how to deal with, get rid of misbehaving, underperforming Strata committee members. If you didn't catch that, then you can head on down further down the Facebook page or into the video library on our Facebook page, and you will find the replay of last week's chat if that is of interest to you. How do we forcibly remove Strata committee members from their positions? But if we've done that, or even perhaps if a committee member resigns voluntarily or sells their property and is no longer going to be on the Strata committee, there is then a vacant position on the committee. Do we have to fill that vacant position? If we do, how do we go about doing that? So I get that question a lot. It's coming up now that we've started talking about committees and committee positions, and I am going to fill you in on the answers to that under our New South Wales legislation here today. So lots of you coming on in live. Cheryl is here saying hello. Hello to you too. Cheryl, thank you for those bunches of flowers. All right, so we're going to head on over and talk about this week's podcast episode. Have you had a listen to my chat with John Trowbridge? Now, this is not the first time that you would have heard me mention John's name or John's work that he's doing in the Strata insurance space here on live. I shared his phase 2 report with you in a Friday live just before Christmas last year. Lots of you tuning into that, lots of discussion that came out of that, many questions, a lot of interest in John's findings. So I promptly booked John in for a podcast chat, and that chat was so important, I thought, and so relevant, essential to bring to you so that you could understand what John's findings have been, what his recommendations are for our Strata insurance sector. I didn't want to edit it down too much. We have ended up with a part 1 and a part 2 of my chat with John Trowbridge, and we are bringing those 2 parts to you in separate weeks. Part 1 this week was published yesterday, and it will have hit your inboxes yesterday if you are on our mailing list to get those podcasts direct to your inbox. John, in this first part, explains why he has been engaged as a private consultant to conduct a review of Strata insurance practices. He does tell us who has engaged him and what their interest is. A couple of emails in my inbox determined to point out to me that he was engaged by the Steadfast Group, who is CHU, and inviting me to draw some conclusions from that. I encourage everybody to listen to the podcast before letting me know your views is always a good first step. In the chat, John walks us through the history of our Strata insurance sector. He explains how it is that brokers first came to be involved and why insurance commissions and broker fees are so firmly entrenched in our system. And he explains why a lack of transparency about these fees, how much they are, who they're paid by. A lack of transparency is not just a problem for owners, but it is, in John's view, the source of a conflict of interest for our strata managers. So, important conversation to go over and have a listen to. The transcript is there for you to download as well. Next week, part 2. Things are hotting up even further with part 2. I can tell you that. The end of part 1, you'll hear John talk a little bit about conflicts of interest. In part 2, John talks further to that topic. He explains why he believes strata managers are failing to properly recognize and manage that conflict. We talk about the fact that commissions are not necessarily fair charges for the work that strata managers do on insurance matters, and how management fees might increase if commissions were removed, but insurance premiums would be less. That is a piece that's often missing, I find, from the conversation about insurance commissions, and John really calls that out in part 2. John talks about some alternate options for remunerating strata managers and brokers for the work that they do on insurance matters of these conflicts of interest and ensure greater transparency, and might even, most importantly, in the process, save us as owners some money. John's phase 3 report is all about the availability and affordability of strata insurance across the country. He explains why our premiums are skyrocketing, why some buildings may not be able to get insurances, and how we might deal with that problem. And indeed, how he sees owners and strata committees are in control, can certainly be in control of a big part of solving that problem. So, part 2, episode number 350, it will be produced as next week. Don't forget to tune in to that one. And I will be here. Well, we'll get to that. There's something happening next week that means I may or may not be here, but I would love to hear your comments having listened to part 2 of my chat with John Trowbridge next week. Okay, many, many more of you are coming on in as we wrap up our week in Strata. I'm just heading over to those comments to say hi. Raymond's going, cooking bylaw. Something about a cooking bylaw? Yeah, we're going to talk about that, Raymond. I'm glad you're here to tune into that one. Vanessa's here saying hi. How you doing, Vanessa? We've got a hey here from ALM Security over on YouTube. Lovely to have you tuning in with us via YouTube. Good to see you. We've got an increasingly large following there on YouTube. Lisa, how you doing? Good to see you. I hope all is well with you. And Olivia is here saying hi as well. Great to see you, Olivia. Excellent. All right. Now, last week I talked a little bit about what the Labor government had promised to do if it was elected at our New South Wales state election in a few weeks' time, what it had promised to do for the owners at Mascot Towers. And the Liberal government has, as of last weekend, responded to what the Labor government was proposing and has told us that they will immediately establish an expert panel to identify a solution for the owners of Mascot Towers. So last weekend, our Minister for Fair Trading, Victor Dominello, said that this panel would be established. It would be led by the New South Wales Building Commissioner, David Chandler. And this panel would determine a clear pathway forward for the residents and owners, I should hope, at Mascot Towers. There'll be a team of industry experts that will be put together by the Building Commissioner to examine the feasibility of remediating the building and reporting back to government on all options to resolve the problems at Mascot Towers. So, press release produced by the New South Wales government last week. We do have a link to that if you're interested in finding out or following what's happening at Mascot Towers, as we have been doing here on the page. Mina has that link to the media release to post into our chat here. While we're on the topic of reform, I just wanted to acknowledge that there has been some significant reform announced for Queensland. I know we have a few people who tune in from that part of our country. Just announced yesterday, there are proposed changes to body corporate legislation, as our strata buildings are known in Queensland, that will apparently make it easier for buildings to be redeveloped. And as I see it, this reform is essentially bringing the Queensland legislation into line, up to speed, up to date with the New South Wales legislation. So we're going to see changes that allow for a scheme to be terminated if there is the support of at least 75% of owners. So the scheme can be completely redeveloped if it is just too expensive to continue to maintain. Then there can be a collective sale or a redevelopment with 75% approval. That is the law and has been for some time here in New South Wales. So interesting to see that now apparently being rolled out in Queensland. The changes also include permitting bodies corporate to be able to prohibit smoking in outdoor areas and in common property areas to better protect residents from secondhand smoke. Once again, we had similar reforms in our 2015 legislation here in New South Wales, and to prevent bodies corporate from banning pets, except in specific circumstances. So those are reforms proposed yesterday, came out yesterday. This would be reforms happening in Queensland. So good to see you catching up, Queenslanders, is what I'll say in response to that. You can smack me for that, Queenslanders who are tuning in here. Sue is here saying hi. Nice to see you, Sue. I'm heading over to those comments. Anna's saying she feels sorry for the people who live or lived in Mascot Towers. Yeah, absolutely. The people who own in Mascot Towers, indeed. Petra's saying Dominello is going to retire. Yeah, that is definitely on the cards for Minister Dominello, who I think has been perhaps more engaged than others in the plight of our strata owners and dwellers here in New South Wales. So it will be interesting to see what happens when he moves on. And Anna says it would be good if the government could move on the flood mitigation in Queensland. Yeah, there's a few pressing issues up there, that's for sure, Anna. So that's your quick whip around the reforms, the policy positions that have caught my attention in our strata landscape this week. It is time to address the famous no cooking bylaw. So I've teased this a little bit on the page earlier today and in my email that I sent out, inviting you all to attend Friday Live here today. This is a case that was brought to my attention only this week, even though it was a case decided by our New South Wales Tribunal at the end of December last year, 2022. It involves a building in Newcastle, and it's a building of, as I understand it, over 80 lots. And it's a building that's a little bit unusual because it used to be an aged care facility. So in this building, there is a communal kitchen, as you might find in a hospital or in a nursing home or in a facility like this, a communal kitchen that is common property that is available for the use of all residents. There is then 4 lots only out of this 80 plus lots, 4 lots that have their own kitchens. They're kitchens that are owned and used by lot owners inside their own apartments. And those 4 lots are significantly bigger than the others that are in the building. So that's the setup of this particular building. What I'm going to do is share for you a copy of the decision here on the screen. It's super short. I've got it next to me as well. And it's literally 3 pages. 3-page decision. Those strata nerds out there who I know like to head over and read these cases, Mina has a link for you in the comments here, both the name of the case, which is Franklin, and the owners of Strata Plan 87497. Mina will post that here for you to head over and have a read. And what I will do is share my screen to take us over to the case. Let's see where I end up if I press this button. I think I'm in the right place. Here's the decision from our New South Wales Tribunal, determined by a single member back at the end of 2022. What I'm going to do is scroll down to a copy of the bylaw. You can see this here on your screen. It was bylaw 28. And bear in mind, I've just told you that this is an unusual building. It used to be an aged care facility. Very few lots have their own kitchen. They use a communal kitchen. And bylaw 25 says that cooking of any nature, including toasting bread, will not be permitted in any lot unless the lot has cooking facilities installed by the original owners of the strata. So the only lots that had those cooking facilities were 4 large lots in the building. The use of a kettle will be permitted. That's good. We can have a cup of tea. Should any lot owner or occupant engage in cooking within the lot, which then causes a smoke alarm to be triggered, resulting in the fire brigade attending the building, then the lot owner will be responsible for reimbursement to the Owners Corporation for any charge levied against the Owners Corporation by New South Wales Fire Brigade. This is a really interesting aspect of the bylaw. And yes, in the decision, the member did address very briefly that aspect. Because if you've been tuning in over the last few weeks, listening to the last few episodes of the podcast, you'll know that cost recovery and cost recovery bylaws is also a hot topic at the moment. Mind the pun here. Not only have we been talking about whether we can have bylaws that ban things like smoking and smoke drift from balconies, and whether that might extend to banning barbecues and cooking and smells coming from balconies. We've also been asking the question, can we have these kinds of clauses in our bylaws that say if an owners corporation suffers some loss, has to pay a fine, suffers some costs as a result of an owner's breach of the bylaws, can the owners corporation recover those costs from the owner? So you can see here the way this bylaw is drafted. It says that the owner will be responsible for reimbursement to the owners corporation any charge levied against the owners corporation by New South Wales Fire Brigade. So not an unusual clause, I think, in bylaws. This one's drafted in a different way, I think, to how we'd usually see these clauses drafted, but we'll certainly come back to that because the member does address this in the reasons. I'm going to scroll down to the decision and those reasons now. You can have a read of each party's submissions if you want to go and check out those. Very short. That's the section of the legislation, section 115, under which you can apply to the tribunal to seek an order invalidating a bylaw. And the grounds to invalidate a bylaw in New South Wales, one of them, is that the bylaw is harsh, unconscionable, or oppressive. So we can't have bylaws that are harsh, unconscionable, or oppressive. If they are, then it is quite possible when challenged, the tribunal will decide that they are invalid. The tribunal had a look at some related cases where this question of what is it that makes a bylaw harsh, unconscionable, or oppressive has been explained. Most recently, the Cosquez, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, Cosquez case. Alison Benson, Strata lawyer, and I discussed that case on the podcast a few episodes ago. She was the lawyer acting for the Owners Corporation in that case. That case said that the leading authority, the leading case on how this section of the Act works is Cooper and the owners of Strata Plan 58068. That's about the bylaw that prohibited the keeping of pets. And in Cooper, the Court of Appeal, the highest court in our state, said that a bylaw that limits the property rights of lot owners is only valid if it protects from adverse affection the use and enjoyment by other occupants of their own lots or the common property. And here's the kicker here in this Franklin case about the ban on cooking. Tribunal said, I am satisfied that bylaw 25 is so wide as to impose a blanket ban on cooking in all lots other than the 4 with cooking facilities originally installed. I'm satisfied that cooking in one's lot is a common incident of property ownership. Notwithstanding there are common area cooking facilities available, I accept that an individual may not wish to use those facilities. A blanket ban on cooking would not be valid unless it were to protect against unreasonable interference with another occupant's use and enjoyment of the occupant's lot or the common property. I'm not satisfied on the evidence that it does so. And the tribunal member goes on to have a look at toasting bread. The submissions from the Owners Corporation were obviously along the lines, well, toasting bread could cause a fire risk. And the tribunal member said, well, I'm not satisfied that that could not be adequately managed. Cooking might trigger a fire alarm, which may disturb other residents, but I'm not satisfied that that would necessarily occur in every instance. A window could be opened, the exhaust fan in the bathroom used to reduce the risk of this occurring. It's expected that any cooking smell might also reasonably be overcome in this way. So the tribunal has said just simply saying no is not good enough. If the bylaw, in my view, if the bylaw was managing the effects or the outcome of that cooking in the lot, if it was a bylaw going to managing the smell, managing the impact, managing the danger of the cooking, perhaps, then that bylaw might be valid. But simply to say, no, can't do it under any circumstances, any kind of cooking with any kind of appliance, the tribunal has said that is just going too far. And as to the clause in this bylaw about the costs of the fire alarm, if it's triggered, those costs being charged back to the owner, the tribunal has read that clause and has said of the covers costs of a fire alarm. So the potential fire alarm costs are not a reason in itself to prohibit all cooking, because there's a mechanism there to be able to recover those costs. This, I think, leaves the door open to owners corporations to continue to have and continue to rely on these types of, I'll scroll back up to where this is, these types of cost recovery clauses in their bylaws. And the important thing to note about this particular clause is that it says the owner is responsible to reimburse the owners corporation. It doesn't say that the owners corporation can charge these costs to the owners as if they were a levy. And that's where we've seen other cost recovery bylaws be declared invalid, where they have specifically said these costs are charged as if they were a levy, and all the same rights of recovery and right to charge 10% interest apply to these costs. Here it's clearly saying that we're going to pay the fire brigade, and then we're going to ask the owner to reimburse us exactly that fee. We're not going to treat it as if it's an unpaid levy. So while that level of analysis and discussion didn't happen in this case, because that wasn't the part of the bylaw that was being challenged, it's interesting that the tribunal did look at it and did come to the conclusion that if you want to manage the impacts of cooking in lots in this particular building, then that is the better way to do it, rather than having a blanket bylaw. So have a look at that case. I'm going to have a little chat with you about how this may be extended, extrapolated, assist if we're talking about the more common complaint. I think about barbecues on balconies, cooking on balconies, cooking smells. I saw, Petra, you posted a comment earlier today about what you're suffering, if not you directly, a friend of yours who is suffering in the building with constant cooking smells. Blanket bylaws, I think, that say no barbecues or no cooking on balconies. I think this case tells us, along with Cooper, which is the higher authority on this question of harsh, unconscionable or oppressive bylaws. I think this case tells us that those blanket bylaws, no barbecues, no cooking, are unlikely to be upheld if they're challenged, because the Cooper authority is that those bylaws limit the property rights of owners. And we need to ask the question, how are those bylaws protecting the use and enjoyment, are protecting other occupiers' use and enjoyment of their own lots? Simply saying no is probably going too far. A bylaw that says that occupiers must make sure that smell doesn't drift, in the same way that we have bylaws saying cigarette smoke shouldn't drift, those bylaws are upheld as being valid. That occupiers need to be mindful of other owners, perhaps that if there are complaints, I know with noise bylaws that I draft, I always draft in a provision about complaints and issuing warning notices and having a whole procedure in place that makes clear that we're not simply saying no noise, no hard floors. We're saying that no impact or no unreasonable disturbance of another occupant's use and enjoyment of their lot. So always asking the question, what is the point of this bylaw? If the point of the bylaw is to make it easy for a strata committee to say no, easy for a strata committee to say no pets at all and not have to think about it, to say no barbecues at all and not have to think about it, then if challenged, those kinds of bylaws, Cooper tells us, cases following Cooper, this Franklin case tells us, are unlikely to be upheld. Bylaws that are drafted that way for administrative convenience, to use the Court of Appeal's words, are not going to cut it. You have to be directing your bylaw to what impact you are trying to protect other occupiers from. Indeed, always get your own advice on these kinds of bylaws. If you've got them in place, get advice on whether they're valid, whether they might be open to challenge. If they're being challenged, get advice on whether that challenge is likely to be successful. Every building is different. I don't think I ever turned my mind to, was aware of residential, by the way. I'm not sure if I made that clear. In this Franklin case, this is a residential strata building in Newcastle. If anyone's familiar with it, let me know. I recognize a couple of the names there. This is a residential strata building that has been converted from aged care accommodation. So no kitchens in most of the lots, bar 3, and common area cooking facilities. I wonder if, with all this talk about the changes to our CBDs, with the pandemic, offices moving, businesses not renewing their leases, entire businesses having their whole workforce work from home, the changing nature of the way we use our cities, there has been over time, over the last few years, I was listening to a podcast recently that was coming from the US about how we convert these office buildings to residential buildings. And there's a lot of interest and excitement in revitalizing our CBDs by converting them into residential spaces. But these are the problems. These are the problems that we face. Commercial buildings, office buildings are not designed to be residential strata buildings. The bathroom facilities are in the wrong place. As we've seen in this Franklin case, there are no kitchen facilities if we're going to start parceling up airspace into residential properties. So we may, if developers want to become more creative, we may be looking at more of these questions of how do we live in and how do we manage these uniquely designed, uniquely parceled up strata lots. An interesting community where you can only cook in a communal facility. But now, without this bylaw, you can toast your bread, I guess. You can have your sandwich press, and maybe along with that, plenty of call-outs to the fire brigade. Okay. Hi, Pamela, coming on in. Nice to see you. Just scrolling back up here to check we've got those links, which is great. Henry, hello, how are you? Henry saying, hi, Amanda, can the installation be regulated? For example, using the LNG connection on the balcony, not an LPG tank, as it's connected to the main isolation valve. Also not having them on top of air conditioning remote units. Yeah, look, I think it can, Henry, and I do see bylaws like that. I certainly see bylaws that say no open flame, no wood-fired barbecues. Those kind of provisions, those kind of conditions go to safety issues. And look, I'm interested to know the arguments that were put to the tribunal in this Franklin case, because I do think safety is probably a big issue in that building too. But I think if you're still permitting owners to be able to cook on their balconies via a different method. You're not saying absolutely no, can't happen. You're giving a process to be followed to keep everybody safe. Not on top of air conditioning remote units. That seems a little bit scary if people are barbecuing on top of their air cons. In my view, I'm not sure if that's happening in your building, Henry. Anna is saying, asking rather, what can be done if after the failure to comply letter has been submitted, the person keeps offending? However, others in the owners corporation don't want to go to the tribunal. Why have bylaws? Well, the interesting thing, Anna, is and many owners I find don't know this. An individual owner, and I speak to the law in New South Wales, an individual owner does have standing in their own right, in their own name, before the tribunal. So you as an individual owner, if your owner's corporation won't pursue a penalty, if your owner's corporation won't proceed to the tribunal and seek an order, you as an individual owner can make your own application against your neighbor if they're smoking on the balcony and the smoke drift is constantly bothering you. We saw Brenton Pittman and Lynette Cartwright with their case that got a lot of media attention earlier this month. I quote that case a lot now. They did exactly that. They sued their owners because their owners corporation wouldn't act. And depending on whether there's a bylaw breach or if there's no bylaw covering the behavior, it might be simple nuisance that you would sue in. But you do have that option as an owner to take matters into your own hands if your owner's corporation won't act. What you can't do in New South Wales as an owner is you can't seek a penalty. If a notice to comply has been issued, only the owner's corporation can take the next step and seek a penalty order. And if obtained, that penalty is payable to the owner's corporation. But you can go to the tribunal and seek an order that there be some action taken by your neighbours to comply with the bylaw, or that your neighbours stop doing something that is causing them to breach you to suffer. So just important that we're clear on that. And Anna's saying thank you. Thank you, Anna, for asking that timely question. Okay, so check out the Franklin case. That is a very interesting building with an interesting no cooking bylaw. I think we can extrapolate some principles from that may help us to test and assess other bylaws that relate to cooking. I do think, as I think I said at the time when all this media was out earlier in the year, and I gave some comments to the Sydney Morning Herald and also to ABC Radio, breakfast radio about it. I do think that it was putting it a little bit high to say that because we see no smoking bylaws or no smoke drift bylaws, we're now going to see no barbecue bylaws and no cooking bylaws. I do think they're in a different category, and I think that the health impacts of passive smoking are now so clear that that is what's driving the tribunal's decisions to ban smoking and to prevent occupants from smoking on their balconies and indeed smoking in certain rooms of their own properties. I don't think we'll see that with cooking, not yet anyway. Okay, let's talk about Strata committees and filling Strata committee vacancies. Last week on Friday Live, I spoke to how we may attempt to remove misbehaving or poorly performing Strata committee members. I spoke about seeking an order from the tribunal for removal, and I specifically said, those orders are hard to get. Never seen one made in my time, and haven't been able to find a published case where an order has been made by the tribunal removing a committee member because of a breach of the Act or the bylaws or a failure to act in accordance with their functions. I spoke about the alternate way to remove a committee member by special resolution. At a general meeting, the owners can decide that a committee position is vacant, or indeed, the owners can elect somebody else at the next AGM, because at every AGM, our legislation says all committee positions become vacant and you elect a new committee at each AGM. So if you can wait it out and then get a group of supporters together to put their hand up to be on the committee, then that is one of the more effective ways and often the quicker way to shake up a poorly performing committee. But what if we have either managed to remove a committee member by special resolution, or a committee member has simply resigned from their position? They've said, I ain't going to cop this anymore. I'm out of here. This is not what I signed up for. I do see that happen a lot, unfortunately, at least in the worlds that I operate in. Or they've sold and they've said goodbye and good luck. We have a vacancy. We have a vacancy on our committee. And I posted earlier this week on the page and over on our Instagram account at Your Strata Property, if you're not yet following us on Instagram. How does a strata committee fill a vacancy? Does it have to convene a general meeting and go back and ask for nominations and then elect somebody to fill that vacancy, or can the strata committee just fill the vacancy itself? And the short answer is that the strata committee can decide to fill that vacancy itself. It can actually decide that it's not going to fill the vacancy and it's going to leave that position vacant for the rest of that year until the next AGM. It's important to understand that there are two different types of vacancies under our New South Wales legislation. There is a vacancy caused by a committee member not being there anymore, leaving, resigning. And there's a vacancy caused by an office bearer, chairperson, secretary, or treasurer, moving on, leaving, resigning. Two different types of vacancies. In the case of a committee member who is not an office bearer, our legislation says that the strata committee may fill the vacancy. It doesn't have to fill the vacancy. I'll take you over to the relevant section of our legislation, and I know that Mina has the links here for you too if you want to have a closer look. Let's see if I've got this in order here. We'll come back to that one. Section 35 in the Strata Schemes Management Act is the relevant section when we're looking at the office of an elected member of the Strata Committee being vacated. And here in subsection 2, this is where we are told that a Strata Committee may appoint a person eligible for election as a member to fill a vacancy in the office of a member of the Strata Committee. So may doesn't have to. Section 35, it's about someone who is a committee member but not an office holder. Section 45 is the section about the vacation of office by an office holder, by which I mean chairperson, secretary, or treasurer. And this is where we're told in subsection 2 of section 45, a strata committee is to appoint a person who is a member of the strata committee, so already a member of the strata committee, or who is eligible to be a member of a strata committee to fill the vacancy in the office of an officer. So your chairperson resigns, the committee can appoint some other committee member to fill the office of chairperson. The committee can appoint some other committee member to fill the office of secretary or treasurer, or they can appoint just another person otherwise eligible to be a member of the strata committee. So this has come up both in section 35 and in section 45. We're filling vacancies. The committee is filling the vacancy, but it has to be a person who is otherwise eligible for election. So we do need to go back to that section, or there's a couple of them in our legislation, to remind ourselves of who is eligible for election to the strata committee. That's in section 31, persons who are eligible to be appointed or elected to the strata committee. I am constantly revisiting this question when I attend general meetings as a proxy holder for owners, attend AGMs where committee members are going to be elected. It's a little bit complex, and this list is long as to who is eligible and what makes them eligible. I've seen many strata managers stumble over this and get this wrong. And my advice is always to slow down when you're conducting an election. Make sure that you are always recording who is nominated and who has nominated them. Because we need to bear in mind that owners can nominate themselves for election, yes. An individual who is not an owner can be nominated for election if they are nominated by an owner, but that owner who nominates them can't themselves be seeking election as a committee member. We may have company nominees who are nominated for election. We may have co-owners who are being nominated for election. And there are rules, as you can see, set out here in section 31 about how all of that happens. I get asked questions a lot about how this process happens and whether this particular nomination, this particular election was legal, I'm always heading back to section 31 to have a look at this process. And don't ignore these following subsections here, which clarify some of what's appeared above. An individual who is a sole owner of a lot can nominate themselves. An owner that's a corporation can nominate their company nominee. The sole owner of a lot may not nominate more than one person for election unless they own more than one lot. That's what subsection 5 says. A person who is an owner of more than one lot may nominate more than one person for election. Nominate a person for each lot that you own. This is an important one. Only one co-owner of the same lot may be a member of a strata committee at the same time, except, once again, if they own another lot. So Mr. and Mrs. Smith own lot 2, but Mrs. Smith also owns lot 6. Well, that's the way that Mr. and Mrs. Smith can get onto the committee, because they are co-owners as to one lot, but Mrs. Smith is an owner in her own right. She owns another lot, and she can then be self-nominated or be nominated by somebody else to be on the committee. That's how we see co-owners being able to be, I'm choosing my words carefully, being able to on the same committee at the same time. So have a look at section 31 about people who are eligible. And if you are a strata committee filling a vacancy, you have to tick these boxes. You have to appoint someone who is eligible under section 31. No, it's not going before the general meeting. Absolutely, it should go before a committee meeting, and there should be a committee resolution filling this vacancy and explaining how the vacancy was filled, who this person is. If they're an owner, have they been nominated? If they're an owner, have they self-nominated? If they are not an owner, who is nominating them to be eligible for the committee? Don't forget, there is another section, section 32. It's a little weird because 31 says these are the people who are eligible, and then 32 says these are people who are not eligible. Read this as not the only list of people who are not eligible. Obviously, people who don't comply with the 31 provisions are not eligible, but 32 is important to be aware of as well. These people are not eligible to be on the committee. The building manager, a person who is an agent leasing lots in the strata scheme, that's a big one. I see that breached once again, in the world of conflict that I operate in, I see that breached quite often. Agents being on strata committees, a person who's connected with the original owner, that's the developer, unless that person discloses the connection at the meeting, and any other person prescribed by the regulations. I'm not sure. Some smarty pants here will tell me, but I'm not sure if we have anyone else prescribed in the regulations who cannot be elected to the committee. If you're unfinancial, if you haven't paid your levies and any other amounts owing to the owners corporation at the date notice is given of the meeting where the election of the strata committee is to be held, and you don't pay those amounts before the meeting, then you are not eligible for appointment or election to the strata committee. So you have to be financial. I don't think that was always the case. I think that's something that came in with the latest revisions to our New South Wales legislation. So those are the relevant sections 31, 32 as to what makes you eligible to be elected to the strata committee, and then 35 and 45 when we are filling vacancies on the committee. Be across those. As I said, I'm always going back and revising those, checking those whenever I'm asked a question. I don't assume. I don't pretend that I remember. They're a little bit wordy, and I think it could be simplified, but for now, that's what we've got, and it's important that we get that right. Everything's fine for 95% of the elections, but it's the one where somebody who shouldn't have been nominated, who wasn't eligible, it's that one that gets challenged, and you don't want to be the strata manager, the chairperson, who's having to respond to that challenge and having to acknowledge that you didn't apply that process correctly. I was asked a question, or indeed I asked the question, and I think some people on this page wanted my opinion as well. Is it fair? Is it right that a committee is elected at each AGM by the owners. But if there's a vacancy, it's then up to the committee itself to be able to fill that vacancy, and it doesn't have to go back to the owners at a general meeting. I think it was Emilia posted on the page earlier today. This doesn't make sense. Do you think this is a gap in the legislation, or do you think that this is intentional? Look, I don't think this is a gap. I think it is intentional. If there's a vacancy on the committee because someone's resigned, as I said, it's all become too much. I'm packing up. I don't need this. My inbox is overflowing. This is not what I signed up for. I'm getting married. I'm having a baby. I'm moving out. I'm getting a tenant, whatever it is, all sorts of reasons committee members resign. And I think it would be a big ask to have to send owners back to a general meeting every time there was a vacancy and every time that vacancy needed to be filled. In some buildings that I know, you'd be having general meetings all the time just to make sure that your committee was well stocked. And at the end of the day, it's open to committees to leave the position vacant if it is, I don't want to say just a committee member, but if it's a committee member who's not an office bearer, as we've said, as we've seen in section 35, committee doesn't have to fill that vacancy. So they can leave the position open. Some committees are unable to do that or don't like to do that because it makes it hard for them to then achieve a quorum at each committee meeting. So this is another important aspect of our legislation, that when you're determining a quorum at a committee meeting, which is the quorum is a majority of committee members needs to be present at the meeting for there to be a quorum. That majority is decided according to the number of people elected at the AGM. So if you elected 6 people, you need to have 4 people at each committee meeting to have a quorum. If you have 2 people who resign, and so you've only got 4, then your quorum still remains 4, and you need all those people to turn up to every meeting to be able to achieve your quorum. So that's the reason why a lot of committees are quite keen to fill vacancies. If your numbers are a bit smaller, then it's very hard to achieve quorum without that person, without that position filled. And I think that's another reason why our legislation permits committees to fill the vacancy, not have to spend the time, the effort, the money often to convene a general meeting and fill that vacancy. And in the meantime, the committee can't meet and can't make decisions because they can't achieve that quorum. So I think it would be administratively burdensome for committees to have to go back to general meetings to fill those vacancies. But remember to always bear in mind who is eligible. Head back to those sections about what it is that makes people eligible to be elected to the committee if you're filling those vacancies. Okay. No questions, no comments on filling committee vacancies. You all there? You all with me? I can see you all there. We got lots of people tuning in here live. I was prepared for more questions. Oh, well, I shouldn't say that now. Not prepared for questions at all. If you do have questions about committee elections and filling committee vacancies, feel free to pop them in here. If I don't get to them now, I will head back around. I'm always interested to know what the challenging parts of our process, of our legislation are for you as owners, so that we can advocate for change if we need to, especially from my position as a strata lawyer who's often called in to contribute to submissions to government to change our legislation if needed. It's important for me to know where you're getting stuck. And also to improve the delivery of this information for you. I do see a question there from Henry, who is heading back to the Franklin case, which was the no cooking bylaw case that we spoke about earlier. If you missed that, you can catch my summary of that on the replay. Back to the Franklin case, the fire system probably needs to be audited and changed. The detectors may need to be changed to photoelectric. Cool. Aged care facilities are usually set up with oxygen lines to the room, so the smoke detectors are usually sensitive. People need to look outside the box before going the bylaw legal route. No need to say sorry, Henry. I love that. Yes, it was something that I didn't mention with that building. It occurs to me that this building must be kind of like a hotel, right? You can have a kettle and your coffee machine, but you can't have a toaster. So we don't have toasters, not in the hotels that I stay in. And for that reason, I imagine it sets off the fire alarm, and that's just not how it is. So that building was obviously set up along those same lines. So yes, could the fire system be upgraded to be able to deal with that? And maybe that's what that building is looking at now. If I get any inside info on what's happening there at that building that I'm able to share with you, I will let you know. Shana's saying, well explained. Amanda, thank you, Shana. Perhaps that's why we don't have questions there saying, I'm lost. What did that mean? Bill and Ben is saying the Act requires a form of motion for the election of the Strata Committee. If this motion fails, that is, the owners corporation decides not to have an election. A well-known law firm did a piece on this in 2020, including during COVID, and said the existing SC stands because the positions are not vacated. Actually did this at an SP in the West during COVID. That is, the motion to elect the Strata Committee was lost. There's a provision in our legislation, Bill and Ben, that says the committee holds its position until the end. Yes, I think you're right. Until the end of the general meeting at which a new committee is elected. Yes, so I think that's right. If a new committee is not elected at that general meeting, then they'd continue to hold their positions. Yeah, good point. Thank you. Cassie's saying, always good to rehash that section of the Act. Yeah, thank you very much, Cassie. Cassie, I agree with that, and it's something that I am always doing. Javier is saying, Amanda, what to do if a treasurer is compromised and has a conflict of interest? Yeah, conflict of interest is something that indeed comes up in the Strata Committee context. It comes up in the Strata Committee context because we have legislation here in New South Wales that says if a Strata Committee is making a decision and a committee member has a pecuniary interest in the matter to be discussed, which I always define as a financial interest in the matter to be discussed and determined, and that pecuniary interest is sufficient to raise a conflict of interest, then our legislation says that conflict must be disclosed. And once it is disclosed, it's up to the other committee members, the rest of the committee, to decide whether that person with the disclosed conflict of interest should vote on the matter or should take any part in the discussions on the matter. And it remains open to the rest of the committee members to say, thanks for your disclosure, noting you've got a conflict of interest, got that, we don't care, you can still vote on this matter. I'm seeing that happen in a community that I'm working with right now. And for those owners who feel that they are suffering because of that conflict, it is really frustrating. So if your treasurer has a pecuniary interest sufficient to give rise to a conflict of interest, that's the legal requirement in Schedule 2 of our Strata Schemes Management Act, then that should be disclosed. And ultimately, it's up to the committee how they deal with that and whether or not that person is allowed to take part in that decision-making. There is no such requirement at general meeting level. So an owner who's proposing a bylaw for a bathroom renovation, they can vote on their own bylaw, even though they clearly have a pecuniary interest in the outcome and are voting in their own interests. I suppose the logic is it's not a conflict of interest because they're not holding the position as committee member required to act in good faith with due diligence and in the best interest of the owners. If you're not a committee member, you can be a bit more self-serving and vote for your own things at a general meeting level. Again, keep thinking about that. That doesn't exclude committee members voting at general meetings in favour of their own proposals. Nothing in our legislation stopping that. Query whether, however, that could still be a conflict of interest if you are, in your function as a committee member, supposed to be acting in the best interests of all owners and with good faith and due care and diligence. Pamela, great question here. I have a question, Amanda. I was temporarily distracted. When there are 11 owners, what is the minimum number of committee members? Oh, great question. So in a building of 100 units or less, so you can have 2 lots or you can have 100 lots, you can have 1 committee member. 1 is the minimum. 9 is always the maximum. In a building of more than 100 units, more than 100 lots, so what we'd call a large strata scheme, 3 is the minimum number of committee members. So I know a few managers out there who I say that to are surprised they're managing large schemes and they think, oh, whoops, didn't realize we had law that said for a large scheme, we have to have a minimum 3 committee members. Interesting. Okay, now I asked for it, and now the questions are coming on through. I'm going to swing back around and have a look at those a little bit later. Thank you all for joining me for this very interesting. I thought, well, I was having fun, and you're all still here, so I hope you're having fun too. Very interesting Friday Live topic. I have very much enjoyed sharing the Franklin case with you and having a look at Strata committee elections, eligibility to be on the committee, and how we fill vacated positions. Next week, busy week for me next week. Right now I'm here in my country home in Mudgee. It is hot, hot, hot. It is hot all over the country, I think, even in weird places like Victoria where it's not supposed to be hot. I will be in the city, here in the country now, but I will be in the city next week. I am heading to Sydney on Wednesday. I was there earlier this week. It's been a little bit nuts in my world of travel, but I'll be there again next week to attend my quarterly mastermind. I'm part of a business mastermind with a group of fabulous women business owners, and we get together each quarter, usually in Sydney, and we plan. We plan, we learn, and a lot of the fun stuff, the new stuff that I bring to you here on our Facebook page and also in the membership comes from the ideas that are born inside that mastermind. So always exciting to attend that. And no doubt I'll be coming out with some fresh ideas after that next week. And then I'm staying in Sydney for the weekend because I'm jumping on a plane on Tuesday and I'm going to Singapore. I am going to the Australian College of Strata Lawyers annual conference. It is being held at Singapore Management University over in Singapore. This is our first in-person conference for the last 3 years, within the last 3 years. So there are many colleagues from across the country that I haven't seen in person for such a long time. I think there's about 50 of us weirdos, strata lawyers gathering together in Singapore from all states of Australia, New Zealand, Singapore indeed as well, academics coming together. We've got 3 days of learning, great presentations and papers to be delivered. I might show you a little bit next week, 2 weeks time that will be, that I'll be in Singapore. I'll send some vids and some photos, no doubt, to fill you in on what's happening there, but I'm really looking forward to that. But that means a whirlwind 2 weeks. So I'm not quite sure what our Friday Lives will hold over the next 2 weeks. I may pop in quickly next Friday before my mastermind on Friday. And I'd love to show you around where I am in Singapore the Friday after. So that'll be fun. Tune in for that. Enjoy the rest of your week in Strata. Have a lovely weekend. Stay cool wherever you are. And I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye.